Thank you. I'm really excited to be joining. And I'm joining from Palestine, specifically in Ramallah in the West Bank. So I really appreciate getting this early slot because of the time difference. The sun's going to be setting soon. Um, I also, it's a long story, but I managed to get a vaccine a day ago. So I'm feeling a little low energy. Bear with me though. I've lived back and forth between Canada and Palestine since I reclaimed my Palestinian citizenship in 2006 after living in exile for the first half of my life. And I was introduced to the field of modern coloniality and decoloniality by mentor and teacher, Dr. Eklan Martinez Salazar, who has written extensively about global coloniality of power in Guatemala. And this was while I was studying at Carleton University, which sits on Anishinaabe land in the unceded region called Ottawa. And while the work that I want to talk about today focuses on my ancestral lands in occupied Palestine, I produced most of it in another occupied territory, Toronto, which is the original Mohawk name of the region called Toronto. So as we know, the original names of those lands were appropriated or erased, as would be done here in Palestine centuries later during the Nakba. And some of you will probably know the 1948 Nakba marked the creation of the State of Israel through the ethnic cleansing and the de-Arabization of historic Palestine. About 90% of the Palestinian population was driven out of their lands at that time, and over 500 villages were depopulated and destroyed. The exiled Palestinians were replaced at that time by a community of around 600,000 Jewish settlers who had been transported there largely during the British Mandate period over the 30 years prior. And at that time, Palestine was erased from global maps, from dictionaries, and it launched this sort of surreal need for Palestinians not only to prove that they had existed on what was claimed to be a land without a people for a people without a land, but that they existed at all. So the Palestinian scholar Elias Senbar describes it as a universe that was disappeared in 1948. And today, many recognize that the Nakba was not a single event, but rather this continued process of displacement and colonization of the land and of human and non-human lives. So the project that I wanted to show you today, and hopefully my internet will hold out enough to show you a clip of the film. The project's called 1/1000th of a Dunam. It focuses on this really particular practice of requesting, holding on to, treasuring, gifting Palestinian soil. And we see this across the Palestinian diaspora. It's understood that certain elements tied to the land, so from things like the olive, the cactus, to poppies, to the soil, that these certain elements have served as symbols or sites of connection to the denied homeland. So I look at soil as just one of many different expressions that root our belonging and that defy the settler colonial push to forget. The value and the meaning of these expressions is not homogenous or stagnant, but they are created collectively by the political reality as a way to inform collective memory and to propel collective assertions of belonging. So I focus on Palestinian soil not because it's exceptional, but for the magnitude of what it symbolizes, the memory of histories denied in the present and the hope for a future. So today, the majority of the Palestinian people across the world have faced either internal or external displacement. Those who remain here in historic Palestine are increasingly losing access to land due to annexation, due to military closures, so on. So despite this physical detachment of deterritoriality, many Palestinian communities find ways to build and maintain attachments to land, even among generations of refugees who've never seen the land. So my father is a refugee from Tabaria. He hasn't been allowed to return to his ancestral lands since he was 7 years old in 1948. And he was the first person to ask me to bring him soil on a trip back here. Since then, I've been asked several times. I've gotten a request from a colleague who's from Gaza, but who's never been allowed to see any other part of Palestine. I had a request from a friend who was born in Canada to refugee parents and who was denied entry to Palestine for life, the first time that she tried to enter. So I brought her soil. And even a butcher at my local supermarket, when I mentioned I was going home, Jerusalem-born, has never been able to return. He asked me to bring him soil, and I did. So even, I think what's interesting, my maternal grandmother, who is here, who has never been displaced, she still lives in the town of her birth almost a century ago. She requested soil from Jerusalem when we got a permit to go to Jerusalem to visit someone in the hospital. She asked us to bring her soil, and she wrote it into her will that she wants this soil buried with her when she passes away. And she keeps it in a plastic bag in the cabinet right next to her bed till today. And I think that although she's never been displaced, her relationship to the soil reflects the ways that exiles also experienced internally because of the intensive restrictions and disruptions that reinforce Israeli domination. The Palestinian political leadership here has for the past decades been hyper focused on the idea of statehood as a means to realize liberation. Analysts like Ala Tartir have written extensively about this, how under pressure from international actors, our political leadership has sought statehood and recognition of statehood instead of pursuing decolonization or repatriation of land in any form. And in fact, the Colonial Alliance between the Palestinian Authority and Israel has cemented Israeli colonialism and has deeply disempowered the people and instead empowered security structures that serve the colonial condition. So it's interesting to look at like the four major junctures of the Palestinian leadership seeking of statehood over the past few decades. So in 1988, we had the Palestinian Declaration of Independence. In 1993, we had the signing of the Oslo Accords, which was in essence a security arrangement to eventually establish a state. We've had for some time now the state building project under the prime ministership of Salam Fayyad, who has declared that Palestinians are close to a state in everything but name. And finally, we've had the probably most well-known, the Palestinian Authority's UN statehood bid, which was led by Mahmoud Abbas, I think 2012, and which promised they promised their ability to govern through strong security establishment. So at these four junctures, the idea of a state is central, and each junctures emerged with Palestinians weaker, more fragmented, and further away from nationhood. The focus on these projects that present themselves as liberatory, but which instead sustain the status quo of colonial dominance, of asymmetry of power, has empowered security structures while disempowering the people and the nation. So at each of the four junctures that Tartir called the obsession with statehood, our Palestinian political leadership, with the support of security agencies that they have reinforced, have created a new level of self-policing on the Palestinian people, so that while in fact living under colonial rule, the political security leadership puts on a performance of sovereignty that solidifies Palestinian authoritarian governance. Now, this colonial reality has, to borrow from Fanon, corrupted our understandings of ourselves. So disempowerment, self-hatred, cynicism, shame are rampant and obstruct the possibility of decolonization by obstructing our ability to imagine and to work towards alternative futures. This brings me back to my work, sort of. The project 1/1000th of a dunam. It's referencing a Ottoman land measurement. It's similar to an acre, and it suggests symbolic reconstruction of a piece of land about 1/1000th of a dunam in size. The central piece in the exhibit, which I can't unfortunately show you because it hasn't been set up because of COVID restrictions, but the central piece is a collection of soils that I've gathered from almost 40 villages now, villages, towns, cities, and they together form a small plot of land, true in size to its name. What I hope I'll be able to show you is the film in a moment. This project actually began very differently than it ended up. It began with interviews and activities, filming with Palestinian farmers, activists, and artists who were focused across the West Bank, who were focused on agriculture or land-focused projects. So for example, I visited Slayman, which is the first community sustained agriculture farm, and it's just outside of Ramallah on the edge of an Israeli settlement. I visited several workshops in Ain Kenya, which are the hills right outside of Ramallah as well. This ecological group was conducting workshops with young Palestinians to pass on the disappearing knowledge about the land to young folks, as we're seeing more and more because of the neoliberal reality and the political security state. We're seeing an incredible move away from agricultural work, and it's a very terrifying future for a place that is where land is so key to our liberation. The more information and narratives that I gathered, the more I returned to the catalyst for this project, which was, as I told you, the story of my father requesting soil from Palestine, which he did on multiple occasions. I was interested in how displaced peoples collect and cherish products of the land they come from, and how this practice embodies a knowledge. I became especially interested in the specific knowledge produced by soil. So what does it have to teach us? In the case of Palestine, on lands that have been colonized, settled, annexed, extracted, what does the soil remember? So the other key piece in this project was a short film called Something From There. And it follows voices to reflect on the idea of holding onto a material, in this case, soil, as a means of reviving memories of Palestine that have been denied, and as a way of maintaining one's relationship to the land that you can no longer access or care for. I focus in on a daily practice like this that is not generally seen as part of resistance. It's not seen as any kind of resistance, but it actually has this power to revive history in the present and to counter the settler colonial goal of eliminating every trace of indigenous life and future. I will try it and play it for you guys now, or at least part of it. It's only 7 minutes. Let me figure this out because I want to be able to share sound. Okay, and maybe just interrupt me if the sound is not good after I start playing.
الحقيقة أتذكر فيلم فيديو إلكم مع الماما على شاطئ بحيرة طبرية، وهذا هذا الفيديو اللي شفته كثير أثر فيي، لأنه بالضبط أنا كنت ألعب على هذا الشاطئ مع أختي المعلمة اللي قتلت بالحرب، يعني في مدرستها. يعني تذكرت النكبة وفلسطين والأخت المفقودة وكله مع بعض، عرفتي؟ فوقتها شعرت لازم بدي شيء من هناك.
I carried once a bag full, a Ziploc bag full, and when I arrived in Ottawa, I divided it into small bags, Ziploc bags, and gave them as gifts. The best gift you can give to anyone. Yeah, there is something like, sometimes I think if Palestine is free, would people ask for such a gift?
هاي فيها ريحة، فيها يعني ملموس، يعني ماتيريال، يعني مادي ملموسي. يعني في إلى ريحة. الصورة صورة يعني جماد لا شيء. يعني لما سألتيني شو أجيب لك من فلسطين، يعني اجت هذا الفكرة انه اريد هذا. طبعا في فترة سابقة يعني يمكن يكون بال 2006 او شيء، الماما جابت لي شوي تقريبا معلقة، ما زلت محتفظ فيها في مكان هون، يعني بكيس نايلون محطوطين.
Your dad, for example, once asked me when I traveled in 1993, you were a baby with your brother. I went to Briaz and I met with his aunt, and I asked her if she can take me from Nazareth to Tabria to see your father's family house. So we went there, and it was really emotional. Tabriz was ethnically cleansed entirely. Not a single Palestinian lives there. And the homes, their houses, they all were appropriated by Jewish colonists in 1947-48. And I picked a bunch, and he still keeps it to this day.
ومن طبرية هجرنا للناصرة، ومن الناصرة راجلين إلى نهر الأردن بالليل. يعني بمعنى أنه بفلسطين أعرف هاي المنطقة، وطبعا عكا، وهذا كله عام 48. رجعت لفلسطين عام 1965 لمدة يوم واحد، لأنه مع أنه معي فيزا أردنية شهر، لكن الشرطي منعني إلا يوم واحد. فزرت القدس وشميت ريحتها وشفت أحجارها الوردية، وزرت نابلس، وهذا هو. ولم أرى فلسطين من ذلك التاريخ. لما نقول بدنا من فلسطين شيء نحتفظ فيه، هذا يعني شيء روحي. في رمزية انه هاي المادة مخلوطة بالماضي تبعنا. ما حدا بيعرف انه هدول موجود فيهم عظام اختي مثلا او جدي، ما حدا بيعرف. يعني ممكن لذلك نتخيل انه موجودين.
From Ottawa, from Syria, people ask, usually the refugees, to have some. And I entered a few homes in Syria among the refugee communities, and they have a plate on the table that has some. So we made of it, we end up in it, because it is the source of life. It is life. It signifies life.
I hope that played smoothly for you guys. I'll wrap up. I just let's see. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there because I think I've reached the time, but I can't stress enough, like, we're living in this reality where our political leadership, which takes the international stage as the representatives of Palestine, this is what many people think of when they're looking to see where Palestine stands on an issue. They look to our political leadership, which is in security alliance with our colonizers. And it's not uncommon, it's actually very common to hear folks say that the resistance is over, or that there is no resistance happening, and sort of living out this internal colonization, while at the same time, every single day, there are so many Palestinians that are finding ways to resist their own erasure, and are finding ways to hold on to and relate to the land in ways that are disappearing right before our eyes. So that is the gist of what I was trying to get at. And I'll end there.
Thanks very much for that, and for all of your work in general. That we do have about 6 minutes before the next presentation. Do we have any questions for Rana?
Do you want me to fill these 5 minutes?
I'm sorry, could I ask a question?
Sure.
You've talked a lot about land. How do you look at the question of religion in Palestine? And I'm not specifically talking about Judaism, I'm talking about Islam. You didn't mention it at all.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it's relevant. Could you elaborate on the question?
Well, I mean, there's basically you have a contestation over the land of two religions. Islam, of course, claimed Palestine. I've read the charter of Hamas, and it talks about Palestine as being a sacred trust that Allah gave. So I was just wondering if you, thinking about decoloniality, you figure anything about the kind of religious view of the land that has been there for a long time.
I think in general, the idea that this is a religious contestation over land is a political narrative, not a reality. I think that it's something that's been built to motivate people, but it's not the true nature of why this land was colonized. I mean, it was colonized not because of the Jewish history on this land, because Jews lived on this land for many years before it was colonized, and because the Zionist project also sought out many other regions around the world to build this state, and they landed on Palestine because of this narrative and how easy it is to build this narrative. I think that it's a very racialized narrative that they were able to tap into.
Well, but Hamas has a narrative too. I mean, it's not, and it is religious, or at least what we would call religion.
Hamas
right?
is not.
Are you familiar with the charter?
Hamas is not Palestine. And I've spent a good portion of this presentation talking about how our political leadership has failed us and has failed the people. The reason that I focus in on projects like holding on to soil, which so many people look at and think is such a small thing that doesn't matter, is because it is only these everyday sort of disruptions that people are doing that seem to hold any value anymore, because all of the power, all of the money is going into political leadership races that are looking at statehood, that are, yeah. I don't want to go into Hamas. Okay, thank you for having me.
Thank you.